John knows me well enough to know I appreciate an extra 2 minutes. In keeping with the title of the theme for the week, I am honored to be a man. I am honored to be a man. Some 3,000 years ago, a shepherd stood on a Judean hillside on a clear night and looked at the heavens above. And he was so thrilled by the beauty of the creation of God that he couldn't look at the creation of God in the heavens without thinking about the glory of the God who made it all. And David, the sweet singer of Israel, then said, "When I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon, the stars which thou hast made, what is man that thou art mindful of him, or the Son of Man that thou visitest him? You have made him a little lower than the angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor and made him to have dominion over all the works of your fingers, sheep and oxen, and all the creation of the animal world." It's a fantastic thought that the glory of God, the creator of all things, would condescend to consider man, and as the text says, to crown man with glory and honor and give him dominion over God's creation. The thought stretches the imagination. Truly, I'm honored to be a man. We realize, of course, that the term man is oftentimes used in the generic sense of human being, both male and female, and no doubt that is the sense in which it was used by David in that 8th Psalm. As a matter of fact, what David said in the Psalm is very much parallel to what we read in the 1st chapter of Genesis, except that it gives attention to male and female in Genesis chapter 1. Verse 26 says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. I was reading on the internet some denominational preacher, I don't recall even what kind or who he was, but he was arguing in favor of accepting this transgender foolishness that we're hearing so much about these days. And he went to this text and said, God made man in his own image, male and female created he them. So he said, both are in the image of God, so whichever one you want to be, you'll still be in the image of God. I first thought that the man must be educated beyond his intelligence. God didn't say, I made you male but if you aren't satisfied with the sex I gave you, it's okay to transgender into something else. No, no, God made them male and female. And no hormone treatments or surgical mutilation or psychological humbuggery is going to change the fact that there's only two genders, male and female. Have you ever noticed in your study of the first chapter of Genesis that when it talks about the creation of the animal kingdom, that it makes no reference whatsoever to the fact that when God made the animals, he made them male and female. He didn't have to tell the cows and the sheep and the horses. He didn't have to tell them they were male and female. They would figure that out for themselves. But perhaps in the foreknowledge of God of what would happen in the 21st century, when it came to the matter of the creation of man in the image of God, God thought it necessary to emphasize male and female. In Moses' law in Deuteronomy chapter 22 and verse 5, let me remind you that even though it's in the Old Testament, moral principles that are set out in the Old Testament are the same today as they were then. And in Deuteronomy 22, verse 5, it says, "A woman shall not wear anything that pertains to a man, nor shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all who do so are an abomination to the Lord your God." Now that's clear enough as far as the thing of cross-dressing is called. But I think it's more than just about styles of clothing. I think it's about trying to transgender for women trying to be men and men trying to be women, and God says it's an abomination. There is a constant battle for the souls of men. The battlefield is in the minds of the people. The devil wants to control how people think. When he controls how people think, he will control what they do. Just a few years ago, certainly within the lifetime of a great many of us that are here, most people knew that homosexuality was unnatural and realized it was sinful. And gay marriage was a thing that would never have been even imagined. But in a short time, the media of the world, the movies, the music, the TV, the godless education, and liberal newscasts has reshaped moral thinking to where in the general thinking of American society, those things are acceptable now. And now the same forces intend to just beat us down with the media, beat us down on the subject of transgenderism to where nobody is supposed to know what a woman is and what is a man. Not so very long ago, many of you remember this from the news, a popular male athlete who won many awards as an athlete was over a period of time married to 3 different women, had 2 children by each of them, 6 children in all, and then decided that all along he thought he was a woman. And he underwent surgical disfigurement, and he came out as a woman. And Time magazine thought he ought to be named Person of the Year. And I don't know whether that's the right way to word it or not, that he ought to be, or should it be she ought to be? Or were these pronouns they're misusing today? I guess it's just they ought to be a Person of the Year. I am honored to be a man. But the attack is on the minds of our youth. Even our young people in the church today, I'm afraid, are struggling between what they're taught in school and what they're taught in the church, and the devil is trying to win them over to the worldly side. We have taught our young people the errors of Catholicism, errors of denominationalism, errors of communism, and so on. Now, perhaps the most insidious enemy is wokeism, and they may be taught the errors of wokeism. They talk about counterculture today, and I thought about what counterculture is. It is a culture that is counter to the culture that is decency and common sense. And that's what they want to be countering. King David had the right advice for Solomon just before David's death. He said to him, I go the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and prove yourself a man. Show yourself a man. Now, we know from history that David evidently waited too long to give this advice to Solomon, because Solomon didn't turn out to be the man he was supposed to be. But it's a good expression of advice. Be strong and prove yourself a man. Boys growing up in our families need to know that they are expected to grow up to be men. Both by teaching and example, parents should make little boys and then adolescent boys to be proud of their masculinity, so that when they do reach their majority, they can say, I'm honored to be a man. In American society, there's a cultural war against masculinity. Back in the 1940s, yes, I can remember that far back, there was a popular song on the radio. A number of different artists played this, and it was often on the radio, and it seemed to be so well received by the audiences. And part of the lines in it said, give us men, some stout-hearted men who will fight for the right. Give us men. Now, that would not be a very popular song on the radio today. It would be considered chauvinistic. But society needs men, and the church needs men, in the sense that God describes men. Now, this isn't to say that women don't have their own place of honor. They certainly do. It doesn't take away from the honor of women to say that men are honored. In fact, Peter wrote that the husband should honor the wife as the weaker vessel, in 1 Peter 3 and verse 7. That, of course, implies that the husband is the stronger, but it doesn't imply that the wife is to be any less honored. Now, radical feminists would take that verse out of the Bible if they ever knew it was in the Bible. I doubt that they know it's there. And there's something in this connection that I think needs to be considered when we think about man in God's creation. In the beginning, God made them male and female, but you know from your own study of the Bible that he made the male first. Adam was made first, and he was made simply by God speaking him into existence. But then for Eve, who was made second to be a helper suitable for man, He did it by a surgical operation. I don't understand that, but that's just the way that it is. And we've all read that, and we all understand that. And you might say, well, that's an interesting thing. That's a curious thing. But actually, the Bible makes more of it than just as an incidental thing. As a matter of fact, when Paul was talking about male authority in the church, he pointed out, to prove his point, he said, for Adam was first formed, then Eve. And then when he was talking about women respecting their husbands in the 11th chapter of 1 Corinthians, he said, for man is not from woman, but woman from man. Nor was man created for the woman, but woman for the man. Now, none of this disparages women, but it does show that God gives special recognition to men as men. Now, of course, we're not talking about men being honored in the sense of being praised or glorified or having pride or having a haughty spirit, an arrogant spirit. No, we're talking about those men that are men of God. We need to think about not just being men, but being men of God. It's not always the case that men are what they ought to be. Solomon, the wise man in Ecclesiastes 7, said, this only have I found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many inventions. Another version says they have found out many schemes. The implication means that God made man to be right, but they have gone off in all sorts of directions. The honored man, the man that can say, I am honored in keeping with biblical truth, is the man that is described in the preface psalm. The psalmist says, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate both day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of waters, that brings forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he does shall prosper. A tree planted by the river of water, that is the man that is honored and blessed. Men are honored because of the opportunities and responsibilities that are given to them as men. Men are honored to be leaders in the home. You know the Bible teaching on this, that the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, Ephesians 5:23. You know that fathers are taught to rule their own houses well, having their children in subjection with all reverence. That's applied to elders' qualifications, but it fits every man, 1 Timothy 3:4. The husband being the leader in the home, the head of the home, is not about domination. It's not about being the boss in the marriage. It's not about a family autocracy. It's about caring. It's about providing, protecting, loving, and as has been emphasized already today, especially seeing to the spiritual welfare of the home. Someone has said that children are more likely to believe in their heavenly Father when they see love and goodness in their earthly father. But let me mention, too, just very briefly, that men are honored to be leaders in the church. Jesus had many followers, both male and female, but he only picked males to be apostles. Only men can qualify to be elders in the church. And it is specifically commanded that in the assemblies of the church that men lead the prayers in the assembly. I will therefore that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands. It is also very clear in the scriptures that women are not to be the teachers in the assemblies of the church. The Apostle Paul said, I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man, but to be in silence. That's a plain declaration of Scripture. Now, there's something that needs to be understood about that verse. King James Version says, nor usurp authority, and some have looked at that term usurp, and they have said, well, if the men give the women permission to do it, they haven't usurped. But that's missing the sense of the passage. The real sense of the passage is they're not to have authority over the men, period, in the assemblies of the church. And men cannot authorize women to do things that God has forbidden them to do. But my time has run out. If you want a sermon more on that, call me at another time.